There we go. Okay. All right. So this is the Enterprise Grants Management System, EGMS training. We are going to be talking about the platform. The intent is to prepare applicant organizations to apply for grants with OSSI or with DC government, because this is actually a district-wide system that we use. We really want to help you get the ball rolling in advance of your grant due date. So everything we're going to talk about here are things that you can do before the grant even opens. We're also hoping, as it's kind of relevant, that you guys might talk to each other and learn a little bit more about each other's organizations and interests and learn about other grant opportunities. So I'm going to repeat this content in the early learning pre-application meetings, but this content is not specific to early learning. If anything is, I'll point it out, but it's not really. So if you're looking at health and wellness grants, which a couple people are, then this is also applicable there. Okay. All right, so this is our agenda for today. We're going to start with an overview of the system and then get into registering as a vendor or user, which, as I mentioned, that's something that you can do today. Completing central data, which is also something you should be able to do soon. I don't think central data is quite ready yet. Then we'll talk about navigating the system, some overall tips, and what it looks like to have a grant with OSSI, which some people in the room can already speak to. Okay, so EGMS. We use the system across district government. It's both for applying for grants, and then if you receive the grant, for managing the day-to-day grant, for looking at your legal terms and conditions, for submitting reimbursement requests and monitoring your payments and your what we call your burn rate, how you've spent against your budget. This is the link that you should really use, this grants.ossi.dc.gov. I was debating kind of navigating there, but we'll do that in a minute. So if you look at the homepage of EGMS, there's kind of three icons on the bottom that will have training and support and help. So there's a help number there, which I'll repeat through this presentation. And there are some training links. This is also a direct link to the training videos and guides, this bullet point right here. And the vendor and user credential guide is one that's particularly helpful. I'll be showing you guys some kind of screenshots from there as we talk about registering as a vendor and a user, but if you go back to your organization and someone else, needs to register as a user, use this material, but also feel free to go back to this resource. Okay, so we're going to get into what it looks like to register in EGMS. So a vendor is at the organization level, and a user is at the individual level. So to register as an organization, you're going to need your Federal Employee Identification Number. Sometimes it's also just called an Employee Identification Number, so you'll hear FAIN or EIN. So what you're going to do is, this is the main kind of login block that you'll see when you go to grants.ossi.dc.gov. So you're going to click the new user link, and then a pop-up will come up and ask you to input your FEIN, the FAIN, and click search. So a couple things on this. So you definitely need to have that number, and your organization should have that number. If you don't know if you have an EGMS user account at all, because sometimes organizations registered like 6 years ago and applied for a grant and didn't receive it. If you don't know, you can still do this and search, and it will tell you if your organization is in the system. So once you do this and you search using the FEIN, EGMS is going to help you understand if you are a new vendor or a new user. So like I said, the vendor is at the organization level. If you search for your federal identification number and it comes back with this message, unable to find an organization with the provided search criteria. If you would like to request a new organization be added, click the request button. So that's going to lead you into a new vendor request. So again, this is for organizations that are brand new to the EGMS system. You're going to go through the new vendor request, and just searching by that federal identification number is going to let you know if you're new or not. Now, another situation is that your organization is registered, but you as the individual person do not have EGMS credentials. So if I can, I'm going to try to zoom in. Here we go. Okay, so if you as the person do not have credentials, you're going to go through the new user request. So you're going to enter, you're still entering the FEIN as the first step. You're clicking search. It'll come back and tell you that the organization is registered, but that you personally are not. And you'll go through request and a new user request. So new user request, it tells you what information you need here. You need your name, first and last, and your email, and then it's going to ask you to select your role. I'm going to get into the role a little bit more on the next slide because this is really a sticking point for people. Just zoom back out. Oh. Okay. Okay, so we've gone through this process. You have either you have registered your organization, or you figured out that your organization was already registered at some point in the past. You've gone through and you're requesting your new user credentials, and you're figuring out what role you want and what role other people might want in EGMS. So there's 3 types of roles that we have here that are broken down. So the view only role is exactly what it sounds like. You can look at everything, you can't make any edits, you can't save any changes. So this is kind of like for a person that just wants to log in once in a while and have a, nice to know, but doesn't really need to change anything. For data entry, the issue that we see more is between data entry and authorized representative. So data entry folks can create applications and reimbursement requests, which are, invoices for payment, and they can save data, but they cannot submit applications, they cannot submit reimbursement requests. So a lot of times the help desk will get the call that someone can't submit things, and it's usually a permissions issue. It can be a couple other things, but it's sometimes a permissions issue. Now, authorized representatives can do everything. So they can edit, they can agree to the legal assurances, which we'll also talk about. They can submit applications, they can submit reimbursement requests. So OSSI has some thoughts on who should be the authorized representative. So normally we want to see that it's someone kind of senior at the organization who would appear on the organization's website, but that's not always realistic, especially if you're a chain charter school or a chain child development center. You're not going to have like the owner of a national chain entering your reimbursement requests, and we understand that. So in that case, we want an email from a leader in the organization that's approving the role. So if you have an accountant that you want, for example, to have authorized representative permissions, you would need an email from a director or someone who's on the organization's website to be approving that role. Okay. So another thing that might happen, just as you might not know if your organization has EGMS credentials, you might not know who at your organization has EGMS credentials. So something that you can do is you can have the authorized representative call or email the help desk to just ask for a list of everybody. And I would really recommend that everybody do this like once a year, because people leave, and then as people are leaving and onboarding a new person, their first thought is not, let me call OSSI and tell OSSI that they don't need EGMS access anymore, but we do want to close out their permissions. So I would recommend that everybody do this just once a year to kind of clean house and figure out who has what permissions, has someone left, do we have new people? So that's something that you can do right now. These are some of the links that I mentioned. This is the federal identification number link. I'm going to talk about DUNS and SAM in a minute. In terms of registering as a vendor, this is really just for the application process. If you are awarded a grant, we're going to need some additional paperwork for you to be able to process payments, like a master supplier form and a W-9, but we don't need those if you're just applying right now. So don't worry about those right now. We will follow up if you're awarded. Okay, so now I'm going to get into central data. So central data captures information that is about your organization, that it doesn't matter what grant program you're applying to. So it's organization-wide information for you. You complete central data once per year, and it's not, like I said, it's not specific to a grant program. So if you're applying to 5 grants at OSSI, you do central data once. We want it to be completed and submitted to OSSI prior to your grant application. You really have to agree to the assurances in central data. The rest of it you do not have to do before you submit a grant application, but I would just save yourself a step and just do it anyways, especially if you already have a SAM expiration date and a DUNS number. You don't want to be in a situation where you don't get those things, you apply for the grant, you receive it, and then you're waiting for those things, and that's holding up your payments if you win the grant. So I would say if you're applying for a grant with OSSI, just go ahead and start the process for getting the SAM expiration date and DUNS number. Most of your organizations will already have it, especially if you've had a grant with OSSI before. And then when we talked about those roles, the authorized representative has to be the person to accept the assurances and submit central data. Okay, so what do you need to do central data? You need contact information for who's going to be the central contacts. So probably a couple people pretty high up that are going to be able to receive information about the organization independent of each specific grant. You're going to need that DUNS number and SAM expiration date, and then a copy of this page that you're going to get from sam.gov that talks about the entity overview. So these are just some additional tips on document uploads, things that people run into. Don't use special characters in your file names. It has to be less than 6 megabytes, and then those are the formats that we accept. I'm going to show you guys a screenshot of the legal entity agrees, because that's a little bit difficult, and we're going to talk about this submission process in a second. Okay, so this is just a screenshot of what central data looks like. So this is just from the test environment, so don't really pay attention to the text on here. This is really just to show you kind of the layout. And for anyone new to EGMS, these are tabs. These are not buttons, and I'll explain why that's important in a minute. So like I said, you need your central contacts. You'll enter the people's names and email address and titles and phone numbers here. The DUNS number tab also includes the SAM expiration date. And the certifications and assurances, that's what your legal team, or if you have any in-house counsel, they're going to want to see that like as soon as possible. So this is something that as soon as central data becomes available, really check out and share with them. So that would include things about like lobbying, disbarment, suspension, employment, those kinds of things. So you're going to look through those, and you're going to just save the page that you agree, and then you're going to click a button, which I'll show you. And then the last thing I want to point out here is that this is the submit tab, and I'll explain why that's important in just a second. So this is what the legal entity agrees looks like. So people say, I can't type in this box, and you don't type in this box. You just click legal entity agrees. When you click that button, the date will populate here. So that's something just about assurances that folks get a little bit confused on. Your grant application might have its own assurances, and then central data will also have assurances. So you might see assurances in two places. When you're trying to submit your grant itself, you might get an error that your assurances were not agreed to. And then people call and say, but I did agree in the grant application. And then we say, yes, but did you do central data? So central data is just something that can hold up your grant at the last minute if you don't understand it. So just take care of it as soon as possible. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about navigating EGMS. And again, this is something you could do as soon as you get access to EGMS. You can log in and kind of poke around. Which is something that I definitely recommend you do. Again, this is from the test environment. So Booker T. Washington Public Charter School is just like a test user that we do. It's not a open public charter school anymore. So a couple things I want to kind of point out here. So the fiscal year is going to default to fiscal year 2020. OSSI's fiscal year starts October 1st and then goes to September 30th of the next year. And the fiscal year is named after the year that it ends. So right now we're in fiscal year 19 because it's ending September 30th, 2019. Starting October 1st, we'll be in fiscal year 20 because we're going October 1st, 2019 to September 30th, 2020. So October 1st is 2020. So most of you are probably here thinking about your FY20 grants. So just be aware of that. When you go into EGMS, that it's going to default, assuming that you're looking at grants, that the funding will start October 1st, 2019, and that means fiscal year 2020. That's not confusing. So a couple things I want to point out here. there is this little tab with the black triangle that says created. When you first log in, nothing's going to be here because you haven't created anything. So I'm going to skip ahead and just show this slide, and then we'll come back. So when you first log in, everything is going to be under available, including central data. So available and created are kind of the two primary headlines, and then within that you have assurances and central data, which will be here, formula grants, competitive grants, and continuation grants. So when you log in under available, you're going to see the central data and assurances, and you'll click create. It'll be over here, just like see this one has create. So once you click create for a grant or for central data, the next time you log in, it'll be under created, right? That makes sense. And from there, you don't have to click create again, you just click open. So that's one important thing, is that sometimes folks get confused because they log in and they say, there's nothing here, and that's because it's all way at the bottom under available until you click create. So I just want to emphasize that it is there. Grants will appear in available on their open date. So a competitive grant that is opening today would appear today under available. And that should be stated in your notice of funding availability, which is that kind of preview 2 to 3 page document that you guys see. So you guys mentioned you're interested in the Quality Improvement Network grant because you saw the notice of funding availability. You saw the preview. And that preview states that the grant is actually opening in EGMS today. So that means that the request for application will be available in those same places today, and that you could log into EGMS today and you'll see it under available if all goes according to plan. So that's just kind of a breakdown of those. I'm going to skip for a second because we just talked about the formula grant, competitive grant, and continuation grant kind of subheaders, and I want to explain what those mean. So a formula grant is a grant that only particular organizations are eligible for, and it's usually based on a per student formula. So in early learning, pre-K is generally a formula grant because the only organizations that are eligible have to receive the high quality designation, and then their award amount is based on a per child formula. So that's an example of a formula grant. A competitive grant has a notice of funding availability. It has an RFA. It has external reviewers that are reviewing and scoring. So this year, the Quality Improvement Network grant is a competitive grant. A continuation grant is one that we are issuing to the same grantee because it's a multiple year grant. So in early learning, our CDA grant is a continuation grant this year because we previously bid it out and it's under a multiple year cycle, so we're continuing to work with those grantees. Okay, so this is just repeating the information that we shared about everything starting under the bottom, under available, you click create, and then it migrates to created, and at that point you click open. Now I'm gonna go backwards and talk about this. This is a huge sticking point for people. And this is why I kind of mentioned before the submit tab versus the submit button. So when you are completely done with central data and with your actual grant application, you're going to navigate to this submit tab. There's going to be these buttons here. There's going to be consistency check, lock application, and unlock application. You're going to click consistency check. It's going to have a little pinwheel. It's going to be running. It's checking your application for any errors or things that don't make sense. If you missed anything, if you budgeted more than the maximum allowed budget, something like that. If there are mistakes or errors that you need to correct, they're going to appear in the left-hand corner in red. You need to go back and fix those and hit save, come back to here, run the consistency check again. And then once you do that and it likes everything, a blue submit button is going to appear here. And at that point, you hit submit. The blue submit button will not appear if you're trying to submit past the grant deadline. And our grants all need to be submitted at 3 p.m. on the due date. So just be aware of that. They all open at noon and they are closed at 3 p.m. So if you're trying to submit at 3:01, you're not going to get that. You're not going to get that submit button. So based on what I just said, that you have to do this consistency check, you shouldn't be doing the consistency check at 2:52 because you could have missed a whole section, right? So a consistency check should be done like as soon as you can, a couple days before at the latest. Okay, so these are some general tips. Again, this is the call center email and phone number, so I've put this on here a couple times. And sometimes people say, well, I emailed the call center on Saturday and they didn't respond, so I should get a grant extension. We don't issue grant extensions in EGMS unless there's like a system-wide failure that's affecting everybody. So an individual organization missing something or failing to meet a deadline is not something that we're going to extend everything for. Okay. This is something I really want to highlight. This is more for organizations that are new to grants with OSSI. So our grants are cost reimbursable, which means that you incur, which is just a financial way of saying rack up costs. And then you submit a request for payment with supporting documentation. When you submit that, from the date that you submit it, we will render payment 30 days. So it's 30 calendar days when you submit. So let's walk through a scenario to understand kind of how this plays out. So like I mentioned before, we're going into fiscal year 2020 as of October 1st. So your organization is racking up costs during the month of October, and you're doing a great job saving all your receipts and saving all your invoices and your documents. You are going to submit the request for payment, the reimbursement request to OSSI in EGMS on, let's say, November 10th. That's kind of the deadline structure that early learning uses, and health and wellness might be different. If everything is perfect in that reimbursement request, we have everything we need, everything looks great, we approve it, and then a check will get cut to your organization by December 10th. So that's required by district government according to the Quick Payment Act. So already that's a little bit of a long timeline, and this is best case scenario. So you've been racking up costs from October and we're paying you in December, and that's the best case. So now imagine you're a new organization and maybe your reimbursement request isn't perfect, right? So we have to submit it back to you. You get it back to us on November 15th. Now we're talking December 15th at the earliest, and so things kind of go from there. We work really hard in early learning to try to get the payments down to as few rounds as possible, but sometimes things happen and we really need that supporting documentation in there for our own due diligence, and it can take a little bit. So I really want to emphasize this for organizations new, that with a cost reimbursable grant, you do need to have cash reserves, right? You can't be relying on that reimbursement request to pay your November payroll, because already that doesn't make sense. So I want to be very transparent about that cost reimbursable structure for anyone considering applying to grants. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording so we can get into more specific kind of questions and details.